conversation. But good stories, in general, they do not preach. They do not just tell you what you're supposed to learn. They lead you to conclusions, just like good conversations, just like Socrates did with his students, asking questions, keeping the viewer in the middle of the conversation, allowing them to reach the conclusion, to reach the truth. I like this mathematical equation. I think it's very true. 1 + 1 = 3. And what that means is that in great film, there are two bits of information. One example is you have the visual and you have the audio. Together as the audience, you're putting 1 and 1 together and you're coming to the conclusion. Different music can make the same video have a completely different meaning. So in every case, it's keeping the viewer in the middle of the situation to ask questions. What's behind that door? Or shouting to the character, don't open that door. I know what's behind, and I don't want you to open that door. So they're part of the film. My dad, when I was a boy, asked me, what's the formula for a rainbow? What's the mathematical formula for a rainbow? And I never knew, and I never found out. And then later I cheated with the internet, and I found out. And there's some ugly math in the middle there, but essentially, there are 3 components. The sun is behind you, the rain is in front of you, and it's refracting the sunlight back to you. So every single person is actually seeing a slightly different rainbow. That rainbow is being made for you individually. And so you are at the center of that reality, seeing the truth. It does not mean, and I want to be very clear, it does not mean that we each have our own realities. Reality is not relative in truth, but we are seeing the truth, each through our own lens. When Pope Emeritus Benedict, was asked, do you think there's only one way to heaven? Very wisely, he responded, after pausing, there are as many ways to heaven as there are people. And I was so moved by that. Clearly, we all go through Christ. He's the gate. But we're all spoken to according to where we're at in life. In the same way Jesus would speak to people where they were coming from, the woman at the well or the Pharisees. He would speak to them starting on their level and then drawing them closer to the truth. As a side note, this slide ended up here. There's a rainbow, there's a double rainbow, there's even a triple rainbow, happens to be around the sun. But as I came across this research, these little extra bands of purple are called supernumerary bows. No lie. So my job at work is to magnify those around me. When I work in a team, I often, as a supervising animator, as a director, I assemble teams together. And I want to make sure there's different talents, different gifts brought together to assemble a team. I need someone who's a deep thinker that might be a little bit introverted. I need someone who's the talker, the cheerleader, to go around and make sure everyone is motivated. I need the hard workers, the workers that don't complain. And I need the boss. I need someone who's a task master, someone who's strict. And I know if I have one of each of these, and usually more workers, but then I will have a good, solid team. So my job is to serve the people that work for me and to magnify their strengths. And even if I wasn't Catholic, Christian, it makes for a better team. It makes for more productivity. These are some techniques that I've been developing, helping to magnify the human in animation. I use motion capture. Some of these techniques were used on Avatar, and I'm now using it to operate Pixar-style characters. I'm using a video game Xbox Kinect system to capture my motion in front of the computer, and as I move my arms around, I can control a character on screen, trying to make sure that the human is driving the motion, even with simple joysticks. These are things I experiment with. I like to work standing up. I have 2 mouses. I even have a foot pedal solution. So here I'm trying to make real-time puppets. The goal here partly is to keep humans driving the performances. When I first started in animation, one of the first misconceptions was, oh, the computer animates for you. And nothing could be further from the truth. At the best of Pixar films, there's a human being acting out moments. Even on Toy Story, I would act out Mr. Potato Head and videotape myself and copy my motions onto those characters. Every single character I've ever animated in the last 20 years, I've done using this technique. And then in things like Lemony Snicket's, we had to animate a baby wrestling a snake, and I thought, well, I wrestle with my daughters, almost every night. So here I put my 2-year-old Grace in a little baby motion capture costume, and I wrestled with her and tickled her because I wanted to not get fake baby motion. I wanted real baby motion. And then I replaced myself with a snake. Here we needed a baby biting on a table and swinging, so I just would have the kids bite on a piece of candy on a bar. And then even a silly dinosaur. I would direct actors acting out the basic body motion, and then using the computer and physics simulation, we would add the springy dynamics of the tail, and he had little arm feathers. But I work with actors. That's a lot of what I do. And then I take their motion, here's a stuntman, and then I exaggerate it, in this case for a movie called The Green Lantern. Not a very good movie, but a movie nonetheless. So, and then lastly, this was something I've done just a few weeks ago that's some of the most exciting things that I'm part of, where I'm reducing all that complexity so that anyone can use it. With one of the interns working at the studio, named Christina, we just have a few markers on her face, and in real time, she can move her face and operate a character like this, just like she's looking in a mirror. This might have potentially negative applications for people wanting to play an avatar, but it allows me to make movies for a lot less money and faster, and allows me to tell perhaps more of the stories I want to tell, because it might be easier to raise $5 million than $150 million. So we talked about metaphor. Metaphor is something that film is really good at. And you may have heard the idea of the true myth that C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, was convinced about Christianity, partly through J.R. Tolkien, that Jesus was the true myth. He was God's truest story, God's word, spoken into the human race. That the reason other religions may have some similarities is because they are whispers or echoes of this truth. The Sibyls in the Sistine Chapel are examples of this, that we're aware that there can be other whispers of truth in other religions. Living in Los Angeles, many of my friends like to say they are Buddhists. I'm sure it's not a real form of Buddhism. It's an American fake form of Buddhism. that ultimately serves the self, but they like Buddhism, and they say, you know what, it's just like Christianity. It's the same thing. And I say, well, there are a lot of similarities, and I have great respect for my Buddhist friends and for Buddha. But he was a chubby man who died falling asleep under a tree. Jesus is the one who is nailed to the tree. He is the sacrifice, and there is no way to get to heaven without a sacrifice. There's a lot of paradox in the Bible. Jesus was the master of metaphor. One of my favorite stories in John 10, he talks about a shepherd and sheep being led through a door. And what does he say at the end of the story? He says, I am the door. When I first heard this as a child, I thought he was going to say he was the shepherd. But then he also says he is the shepherd. He is the door and the shepherd. So these things are mind-blowing revelations that I can meditate on for all eternity, and I hope I will. But a lot of these truths are in science. Science is very much on our side. It is once again as the Old Testament says, God's hand is written in the skies, and I believe it's written in the stars, in the universe. The universe has God's fingerprints all over it. And so in quantum physics, the forefront of science, they come to a paradox, and they don't understand it. I think I've heard of a quantum physicist saying anyone who understands quantum physics doesn't understand it. It's a mystery. I think a lot of the truth in life is full of mystery. And why is it that when we watch movies that we've seen 100 times, we still can be moved to tears, even though we know the ending? It's as if we have a dual nature, that we can be inside of time, inside of the movie, and outside of time. And these kind of metaphors help me understand Jesus' dual nature. Why could he be so sad in the agony of the garden, knowing God's plan for him? And because he was both human and God. And these are mysteries, but they're mysteries that I think are true. In Aristotle's Poetics, he has these 6 elements in this order are the most important for good stories. First is story. What are you saying? Number 2, the character. Some people say character and story are 2 sides of the same coin. The meaning of the story. Dialogue, music, and then spectacle. In Hollywood, it's upside down. Mostly. Occasionally, there are some exceptions. In Hollywood, it seems to be spectacle, music, dialogue, meaning, character, and story. Admittedly, my job is mostly in spectacle, and often at the service of stories that may not be negative, but may just simply be empty. And unfortunately, some jobs I work on are serving movies that don't have strong stories. So what do? Well, the reason I'm there is actually not primarily for that film we're making. It's to serve those others around me. It's the opportunities I have with my coworkers. That's the real mission field, not to preach, not to hand out a stack of information, but to listen and to help them ask questions, to help guide them to the truth. So, in artwork, whether it's still images, painting, sculpture, music, architecture, clothing design, they all follow the same principles of unity and harmony. And I'm not going to go too much into these because I probably have, 5 more minutes? 5 or 10 more minutes? Okay. In Van Gogh's painting of sunflowers, what we learned in art school is very interesting. He liked putting the green and the red often right next to each other to create contrast of opposites, and in that contrast creates